Hello, everyone. We are the Myriad Mobile Capstone Group. My name is Price.
Jacob Winningham.
Gwen Last, and Jarrett Farrell. Myriad Mobile is a software development company located in downtown Fargo. They have a split focus in their company between the solutions side and the bushel side, and the solutions is essentially making custom software for outside clients. And the bushel side is kind of where we come into this. The bushel platform is a platform for mobile apps that connects growers to elevators. It's integrated with different grain elevator accounting systems, and it provides information to farmers like cash bids, futures, contracts, and scale tickets. So it's kind of a digital version of what the farmers were doing before with their grain elevators. And we were tasked with creating or building off of a existing iOS proof of concept app, which is a screenshot of up there. The proof of concept app was about creating scenarios and seeing possible profit outcomes for different variables like how much your yield per acre, cost per acre, your price, and your basis. So we were pretty much tasked with making a Android version of this to bring it to the Android platform.
Yeah. So the need in this situation was, well, it was also an opportunity to move the iOS app to Android. So our short-term opportunity or kind of goal was just port the app with some of the features. So we didn't implement all of the features. We just chose the ones that were most important. The long-term opportunity would be to integrate the whole app into the existing bushel platform, which you can see on this diagram. So it could be implemented as a standalone app, so just kind of like a utility category of apps within the platform, or it could be implemented into the existing elevator apps. So it needs to be integratable. We want to make sure that when we hand it off to Myriad that they can actually use it. And one of the ways we did that was connecting it to the future service, which we'll talk more about later. The value to customers. So you could think of the app as being valuable to customers and to the company in different ways. The reason it's valuable to the customers, it has all the value that the iOS proof of concept would have, but now also for Android users. So what is that value? It lets farmers make decisions on what they want to grow, and it lets them get information on how their outcomes might be with regards to profit. So when you're growing, there's a lot of unpredictable variables, and there's some predictable variables, like the cost per acre or the local basis are usually predictable, but there's a lot of things that are unpredictable. Like in this diagram, you can see all the different factors that influence farmers' decisions, and there's a lot of them. So you want to find a way to display information that gives them more certainty. And there's different scenarios, so you might want to see what happens if you grow a lot of corn, or what happens if you grow soybeans, or whatever you're growing. You can make different scenarios in the app and see the different outcomes. And it has all the convenience of being able to use it on your phone. So how is it valuable to the company? Well, it is a proof of concept, which, I mean, you can take it literally. It proves that this kind of app can be made, and it gives an idea of what it would look like and how it would be developed. It could be integrated into the bushel platform. So in order to support that, we wanted to make it with clean code and make it support the future features that are going to be added on, like the JSON interpretation.
So our schedule looks like for Sprint 1 was mostly setting up the repository and getting familiar with our environment, which was Android Studios, and learning how to code in Kotlin. Sprint 2 was creating those initial UI forms that we can show off in the demo, and just implementing everything before we got started with the risk matrix. Sprint 3 dealt with starting up that risk matrix and getting the database implemented, as well as setting up scenario lists, creating multiple scenarios. And Sprint 4 is when we completed the risk matrix, started the create the database functionality for the scenarios, and the postmortem, which is pretty much the deliverables.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the progress that we've made since our midterm presentation. In terms of the database, the CRUD thing, create, read, update, delete, we've made progress in all those areas while we've implemented them. So for the create scenario, I guess we already had all the parts in place, we just had to connect them. So we already had the input form and we already had the database support for adding scenarios. So we just basically hook those up and click save and it'll go through the database. For reading, the database had to get updated. Before you could only read one at a time, one scenario, and you had to know the ID. Now you read them all when the app starts, and that was implemented, and then they're also displayed in this nice list that you can see here. The update functionality, so basically editing scenarios that you've already saved. The database was updated to support that, and then it reuses the form that we had for creating a new scenario. It just adds all the information that you already had into those fields, so you only have to change the ones that you're going to change. And the delete functionality was added to the database as well. And then we updated the menus, so you can see there's a delete button up there if you want to delete all the scenarios, and there's one if you want to delete an individual scenario.
A big chunk of what we started on with Sprint 3 was the risk matrix, and this is kind of the view that you get to see, just to see all of the different price ranges that you can get based on what your price is going to be and what your yield is. So we calculate the price and yield by taking each individual from the top of the header, you take whatever your yield value is, and you take it on your side there, you grab your price, you multiply, or you subtract the basis off your price, which is down there on the negative 0.23, which is usually a negative value because it's like a tax that the elevators have. And you calculate that by multiplying it and minusing whatever your total cost is. So that's how you get the negative numbers. Yeah, for that's pretty much it. And then we also have a range slider part where you can edit your range and your price range, and you can get to see more specific ranges than in the previous one to see what type of price that you want.
So now we'll go to the demo. Okay, so this is the app when it's loaded up. It shows two scenarios that were already created in this list. So they're already created, they're saved in the database. So we'll go ahead and make a new one. So in this screen is where you're going to be selecting your crop and the delivery date. And this is, the fields here were essentially taken from a piece of JSON data from what the API is modeled for the live data that Bushel uses for their crop data. So these are just taken from a piece of those JSON data. So this could be updated to show all the different crops that they would use, like wheat, corn, soybean, stuff like that. But for this app, we were just tasked with setting up just corn with these 3 delivery dates. So you choose your crop and the delivery date. Then you go to the scenario name, put all the information in. This is essentially just for the grower to put in the data that's relevant about the harvest that they want to see the profit loss scenarios of. So this is pretty much just however many acres you were growing for, how many bushels you harvested, and then you estimate the total cost to try and see how much you'll make based off the number of bushels and how much a bushel is worth. So that just multiplies all the bushels, and then it just takes away from the total cost, and you just see what your profit loss scenario is. So then you put in the local basis, which, like we said, is kind of like a local tax because it makes the gap between the national price and the local price. It kind of just takes that into account. It's basically just a local tax. So then you hit save, and then you get to this nice screen. At the top, it'll show the scenario name. It'll show this is the profit, $28,614. If it was a loss, it would show it as a negative value, and then it shows you profit margin of 34%. And then, so the matrix here, everything that's labeled in green is essentially like considered profitable. The yellow areas are kind of the middle ground of like breaking even. And then the red obviously shows a loss. So if you had like $3.85 was the price per bushel, and you grew like 201 bushels per acre, it would be $181 of a profit. So the y-axis represents the price per bushel, and the x-axis on top shows the bushels per acre. And then down there with the market, it just shows the data that you used, so that your crop was corn, and you chose your delivery date, and then it also shows what the price would be per bushel, as well as the basis, so what your cash bid price would be per bushel. Then we also have the edit range. So this is kind of just used to see or to widen the range so that you don't have to go back through every time and update stuff if you don't want to. You can just quickly do it here. So if you need to increase and see what your profit loss scenarios would be if you had a larger yield, you would use this one to increase it to maybe like 305 bushels per acre on the top, so that you can see what it would be if you had a really good harvest, or you can slide it down to see what it would be if you think you're going to have a bad harvest. And in the same regard, the same thing goes for price. So you can just see what would be the difference if the prices are really low per bushel, or if they're really high. So you can lower that too to see different scenarios. So essentially, you just get a good quick glimpse of the different variables that can change with that stuff. You can also edit a scenario, so you can change if you want to see it save as with a different number of harvested bushels. You can just change that, and that will update to show you a new scenario with the new updated data that you put in there. And then if you click back, this will go back to the list of all the scenarios that you've created previously. This essentially just lets you see all the scenarios that you've created, and saves them so that you can go back and look at them at any time. Shows all the relevant data, like the revenue, the expenses that you had, the profit margin, and then the profit loss actual values. This is also clickable, so if you click into one of these, it'll just bring you right back to the same matrix to show you the data relevant to that scenario that you clicked on. On the screen, you can also delete a scenario, and deleting it will take you back to the screen and remove that from the database. And then you can also delete all of these if you want to quickly delete all the scenarios. If you have a huge list of scenarios, you can just go through and delete all of these, and then it'll just bring you back to the screen, which will just try to prompt you to create a new scenario. So that's pretty much what we've got to at the end of the semester here. Making this, we developed it in Android Studio. We ran it on an Android Studio emulator. It was written in Kotlin because that is what Myriad Mobile uses for their Android apps, and it's kind of what the industry is moving towards. We use a SQL-like database for saving the scenarios on the app, and we were using version control with GitHub.
All right, so some of the issues we ran into while working on this project. The risk matrix itself was one of the most difficult things to build. We didn't really know how to do it at first. We asked the Myriad Android team for ideas about libraries we could use, and they ended up giving us some that we didn't use. So we found a way to make it work. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the construction of the race matrix, I just made a table, and I kind of just calculate each individual column and row based on the header value and the price value. And I can modify whatever the gradient should be for each value.
Yeah, so we did it more manually than using a library, but sometimes we have to do that. The range slider, similar scenario. Ended up finding a library for that one, but it was hard to find. So Kotlin, none of us had really used Kotlin, and there are some confusing things in Kotlin that you don't run into with Java, like the null safety and things like that. So we had some trouble with that. But it's mainly, it's a good language, and we got over that. The SQLite on Android was a little weird at first. It's like it's a database, but it's on your phone. But it's actually pretty easy to use once you know how to use it, like a lot of these tools, and got through that as well. Dividing up development work, that was especially an issue at the beginning of the semester where we weren't really on the same page with getting everybody's workspace set up and then everybody knowing what everyone else was working on and the status of where the app was, and we eventually got better communication kind of workflows and also everybody's set up.
So for the postmortem, what we did well was we did eventually have some good work ethic. I think we finally got some good work done and started working as a team, and it really helped to ask questions with our sponsor and our instructor. That really helped later on. What we definitely learned Kotlin and Android app development, which I think is pretty cool actually. Database integration is just something I have pretty little. I think we all have little experience on. I think we learned a lot about that, as well as working in a company environment with Myriad Mobile. I think that's a pretty good experience that we all had. Maybe not all of us have had a worked in an environment like that. And after that, all that's left for the postmortem is the deliverables, which is the code and documentation. So for the next steps for this app, Myriad Mobile will review the code for this. They'll look at it as a proof of concept, like we said, and a possible integration to the larger elevator app as some sort of utility.
Yeah, this project was essentially just develop or like create as a potential use for something that Bushel might be adding to their platform in the future. Obviously, they're like really busy making new things that they know are for sure going to be going into their app, but this is just kind of something that was already existing from the iOS version. They just wanted to have similar or same functionality changed over to Android so it could be used for both platforms.
Have questions?
Cool project. Always a lot of fun to hear about mobile stuff. I've worked on mobile and I know this comes with a lot of challenges. A little criticism or a question, I'm not sure why this was done. You guys didn't seem to be following any Android material design principles at all. For example, your plus button add stuff and right next to the delete button, which my fat fingers will press it to delete something. Usually there's like a floating button for material design that you have to put at the bottom for either confirmation dialog or adding something or editing, like bottom right. I'm not sure if this was done on purpose or if that was under guidance from the sponsor or it's just something that you guys kind of eventually missed.
Yeah, I mean that's valid. I mean, if we had more time, I would have preferred to go back and change the design because I kind of know what you're talking about. But like it was kind of just us jumping in right away and setting stuff up, and then like trying to progress to get to like the core functionality done before like making sure that everything is like done to every guideline. So I know what you mean, but I think we kind of just like jumped into it right away, and then didn't know exactly what we were doing for some of the design stuff. And then going back, if we had a little bit more time, we'd probably go back and clean stuff up to make it more of like Android. All of it looked like Android design stuff.
It looked a little bit more like iOS, especially with the back button on the left.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, and yeah, we did try a lot of the iOS, and I think maybe sometimes like we probably got a little too deep into trying to modelize the iOS one. But yeah, I do agree with that.
Oh, very, very cool. Cool project, thanks.
So following up on his question, so if you had done the UI description markup ahead of time, do you think this could have actually made sure that this didn't happen, like button issues?
Yeah, I think. No, go ahead.
Okay. So our kind of plan was that we don't really need to do that because we're just going to look at the iOS that we already have. So yeah, that kind of bit us in the end because it did end up looking more like iOS than Android. So yeah, we could have taken a sort of intermediate step and said, okay, so we want it to look a lot like this, but here's what we're going to change to make it match with the classic Android style. So yeah, that could have been avoided.
I think in the end, there's only some small things that probably looked really iOS, like the back button not being like the typical left arrow or whatever and stuff like that. So that'd be like a pretty small fix, but I think we kind of just jumped in to try to get the real functionality working and kind of just put that on the back burner to try and make progress instead of really like reviewing what we're doing design wise. But
I like what you're doing, so the question isn't to take away anything from this, but if you said, could you envision like a grand version of this? I saw at the beginning you had slides that were talking about the value of showing to the customer all the different seed types. And so, for example, different seed types might have different yield and cost. And so you could extend things and say, if I took this seed at this cost and get this yield, just make all of that part of one big thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's only limited to your imagination of what you want to do with it and how much time you have to develop that, just like a lot of software projects. You can actually, it does support, like, it's not just corn when you're
Right.
selecting. I mean, that's based on the output from the JSON, which you would get from an API call. But yeah, you could implement that functionality if you wanted to.
and not to take away what you're talking about, but I think the original point was just to have a scenario just for one crop type, not necessarily comparisons of like
No,
different
I-
plantings. But what you're talking about could definitely be something that for, I guess, added in the future or something.
For future thing.
Other questions?
Just a quick one. How was Kotlin? Never coded on it. Was it fun? Did you really code in
At this
Java?
point, I would much prefer using Kotlin over Java.
You would?
I would consider it Java with a prettier mask.
Okay.
It's because it is essentially Java, but there's things that you can do things in a lot fewer lines of code in Kotlin than you can in Java, and I think there's a lot of things in Kotlin you can do that are a lot nicer than you can do in Java. So I prefer it at this point at least.
Was it a steep learning curve? Did you code in that language
Some of the
yourself?
basic stuff takes a little while to get the hang of, but once you learn how to do it, because some of the syntax is a bit weird for like declaring variables and things like that, and like the null safety thing that he was talking about can get a little weird how to
Could
deal
you
with that.
elaborate on that? Also, what do you mean by-
Like if something can be potentially null in Kotlin, you need to like explicitly deal with the case and whether it's
Okay.
null or not null, or it will not compile, or there will be really bad things happening.
Okay.
So you have to you really have to be very specific and explicit with your null checking and stuff. So it just adds a little bit more to that, but it's really beneficial in the end, and it's I think probably useful to learn if you're going to do something with Android.
It's on the list.
Thank you.
Thank you.